Greetings. Welcome back to Sick Flick. I'm so glad to be back. I'm so glad to have you back here with me. And I'm excited for today's episode. So, today's episode is going to be dedicated to our bi best friends. um, yeah. Also, oh wow. Also, it is our 10th episode. It's crazy. I feel like we should have gotten there sooner, but I love taking breaks. But regardless, it is our 10th episode. So, a round of applause for that. A round of applause for that. Anyways, yeah, let's get started with the episode. So, today we're going to be talking about bi films. We will also be talking about bi film history. And in that sense, I guess we can get started with our film facts and whatnot. So for our film history segment, we have a bit. I keep saying that. We have a bit. So our first is our first documented appearance of a bisexual character. That was it was really seen in two films that both came out in 1914. The first one is called A Florida Enchantment by Sidney Drew. And the second one, I'm gonna butcher it because it's German. I don't know. I can't even begin to fathom German. Okay, but I'm gonna say it's Zappatus Band. I tried, and that's all that matters. So those were the first two films that were kind of the first documented appearance of a bisexual character. Moving on, this is primarily during the Hays Code, more so, I guess, more so targeted during the 1930s and 40s. But during the Hays Code in America, there were virtually no bisexual characters or no bi characters, plot lines, stuff like that, that appeared in films during that time because you weren't allowed to like clearly explicitly say like bisexuality or bisexual or show that, again, along the lines of not being able to show like homosexuality or talk about it in general during the Hays Code. So that's something that happened as well. There were, I guess, much less of bi characters than there are of like gay or lesbian coded characters during that time. And this lack of representation, it started to make people think that bisexual people just did not exist, you know? So if you want to know where that that mentality comes from, it primarily, I guess, comes from the 1930s and 40s, where films just did not include bisexual characters really at all. Moving on, in the 1968 film The Fox, it was one of the earliest depictions of bisexuality in cinema, and it was one of the earliest depictions of bisexuality that kind of gave its bisexual character dignity, dramatic dignity, and kind of, didn't treat it as a way of exploiting them or to benefit some sort of like male gaze. Um, so yeah, I feel like I'm moving so fast through this, but whatever. And then in the 1982 film Making Love, it was one of the first mainstream Hollywood films to openly depict and address a bisexual character, again without vilification. So The Fox was one of the earliest to show a bisexual character with dramatic dignity, and Making Love was one of the first like Hollywood films to do it. Again, without any sort of vilification or exploitation. And then ending off our film history segment, 2017 was actually a very important year for bisexuality on screen. There were probably more than I'm going to talk about, but there were a handful of really big, especially blockbuster films that included bisexual characters. So along the list is Rough Night. It had Zoe Kravitz as playing a bisexual character, which I kind of want to talk about. Not that movie, but Zoe Kravitz being bisexual characters later on in the episode. And then there was Atomic Blonde. Thor Ragnarok was considered a bi film or bi coded film. And then the film Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. I have not heard of that, but it apparently included a bisexual character. And I feel like that's probably one of the more indie films out of these. But nonetheless, the 2017 was a big year for bisexual character representation, so that's pretty cool. Um, Going on to our coding and stereotypes. So, in the one of the ways that bisexual characters in film have been coded or more so stereotyped is that there is one where bisexual characters are often portrayed as kind of like sex crazy or an object for the male gaze. That mostly comes from, I think, well, the object of the male gaze, I think, comes from women and women to women relationship. So, like more lesbian relationships, but also from a bi character. So, when those happen, it's usually hypersexualized for the male gaze. And then, just kind of in general, bisexuals are seen as sex crazy. Um, I think you do definitely see that in a lot of films. Even today, there has not been a lot of progressive films that, well, I won't say that, but I mean, I think that it's so easy to stereotype bisexual people and characters still today, a lot less than what you would see for gay or lesbian characters or trans characters and so on. Um, but yeah, so that was a stereotype that they're seen as sex crazy or just kind of an object for the male gaze. This happened especially, or it continues to happen, especially in like exploitation films and B films or B movies, which I think are like horror movies. Um, so yeah, and then the film Basic Instincts. I feel like it came out what 1992 ish in the 1990s. Um, it stars, or it's about a woman that is, I don't even remember. She's murderous. She's a femme fatale, but she is also in a bisexual relationship. And that film in particular, but I guess just to show more of the more recent films that still kind of perpetuate this stereotype, she perpetuates the criminal homosexual slash the cold blooded villain. So, like what we talked about last episode, where a lot of gay characters or gay coded characters show up as villains, especially in a lot of classical films. This would be kind of an exception to that rule, um, or not an exception. It would be kind of like another case in which you see this stereotype come up, um, as it is not just primarily for gay characters, it is also for bi characters, gay characters, or queer characters in general, but also a big part of bi characters in films that are also portrayed as these cold blooded villains. So, and again, that is one of the more recent examples, just again to show that these stereotypes didn't kind of stay in classical Hollywood or classical films. You can still see it in a lot of newer films. So that is unfortunate. And then the last stereotype is the bisexual betrayer. Um, and that is essentially the trope that bisexual characters or bisexual people lack commitment. And so, in a lot of films that portray or include a bisexual character, they are usually just kind of flopping around between relationships, not really staying monogamous to a person. And a lot of times it shows them kind of betraying um, their lovers, especially their gay lovers, to kind of show that like they're not faithful to their community. So that is something that comes up. It's also going to be in one of the films that we're talking about today. So I'll mention that and kind of talk about how you can really see it in that film. Um, and that's all I have for stereotypes. So going on to our last segment is our facts and tidbits. So the first one is going on to our facts and tidbits. Our first one is Disney's new show. It is called The Owl House, and it is making history for Disney's first bisexual lead. I don't know anything else about that. I just kind of ran into that knowledge, but it'd be interesting to see and to hear about. I know that Disney Channel, I know that Disney has included some characters that are gay. I know that I forget what the show was called. Um, Something Mac, I don't know. But I know that in like one of their TV shows that they had on, I don't know if it's still on, I have no idea. But I think they had a character that was gay or a character that came out as gay. Um, so I'm not going to say that they're the most progressive, but I'm going to say that they have made some, or at least one, progressive step forward. So it's nice that they're making another and including a bisexual character. It'd be interesting to see how that comes about. Like I said, I don't know really anything else about the show. I don't know if it is you know, male, female, what have you lead. Um, so I don't know how they're going to analyze that. I also don't know how big or how important their sexuality is in the TV show. I also have no idea if it's out yet. So, but if it is, that'd be interesting to see. But if not, that is what is to come. And like I said, it's making history for being Disney's first bi lead. The next one is not really um, in absolute relation to film history, but kind of in general for bisexuality as a whole and the recognition of bisexuality as a sexuality. From the 1970s, bisexuality as a like valid, legitimate, distinct sexuality started to gain visibility um, in a lot of the literature, academic, and like activism spaces. So I feel like, history in general kind of helps to shape how film history works as well, especially like I said with last episode with the AIDS HIV epidemic. It played a huge role in how images are portrayed back to people. And I think the same goes with this, where like if you're watching films from like 1970 up, you'll probably see that maybe there is just more validity to their sexuality, even if it's not the most perfect representation, or maybe you see people being more comfortable with recognizing it as it is. And I just think that that's interesting too. And so, lastly, for our last fact tidbit and for our last um, by film history fact in general, the actress Judith Anderson, she was allegedly bisexual. Um, Not 100% confirmation on that, but she became the first performer to receive an Oscar nomination for a gay role. This was in the film Rebecca. If you remember to last episode, I briefly talked about Rebecca because that film was one of the films that included the cold-blooded villain trope. So, she won an Oscar nomination for this character that is gay or gay coded, but it wasn't necessarily a good role, or it wasn't necessarily positive representation because it perpetuated the criminal homosexual trope, But she was the first one to get the nomination nonetheless. And I guess again how it relates to bisexuality is she was allegedly bisexual. Again, there's no confirmation. I think I saw something that said that she was in a lesbian relationship. Um, and she also was married to two men, not at the same time, but like throughout her lifetime. But they weren't necessarily good relationships. But nonetheless, I think that's pretty interesting to know at least the first gay role Oscar nomination. She did not win. She lost to, I can't remember. It was something else. Oh, she lost to the actress that played a woman. I don't know who. In the film adaptation of Grapes of Wrath. I'm like 98% sure. So, but yeah, that's all I have for our film history facts, tidbits, whatnot. Um, and without further ado, let's get on to the episode. So, I have a few things that I want to talk about. I actually have two TV shows. That's crazy. I don't know if I've had TV shows thus far, but we have two TV shows to talk about and a couple of movies. Um, I guess first I will talk about the most recent film that I watched, and that is Sunday Bloody Sunday. It's on Prime, surprisingly, and this is the film that I wanted to talk about because I said that it includes the bisexual betrayer trope. In the film, there is a man, his name is Bob. He is having a relationship with a woman. I forget what her name is. And he's having a relationship with a man. I also forget what his name is. At the same time. They both, I think they both know of each other. Like they both know that they're both having a relationship with the same man and that he's dating them at the same time. Um, but the whole part of the movie, or the whole premise of the movie, is that they just love him so much, and they love what he makes them feel so much that they kind of decide to stay with him despite knowing that he is in these relationships with other people. But in the end, and I don't know how much of a spoiler it is, but he wants to go to New York City to, I think, pursue like art. And he's been wanting to do that throughout the entire film. But in the end, he kind of decides to actually go. And it's kind of that, I guess, aspect where he kind of leaves both of them to pursue this life in New York City, which kind of breaks their heart, which again kind of portrays the bisexual betrayer trope, but also the fact that he's kind of in this relationship with two other people. Um, I feel like, though, that trope, at least in this movie, is a bit outdated because, like, as I was watching it, especially since they know, like, since the other two people know of each other so much, or they know of each other, and I think in the end, like, they literally know of each other. It's kind of confusing though, because it's like there's there's this family that has a bunch of kids that the woman agrees to like watch their kids for them, and Bob comes along as well. Like he helps watch the kids with her for like half the time, and like they know of her. It seems like they're good family friends of her, but they also seem like they're good family friends of Bob. And I guess you can say, um, in the end, they're all having like breakfast together, like the family, the woman, and then the man that Bob is also in this relationship with. He comes along and he's eating with them. And then, like, they have a short conversation afterwards where they talk about Bob and they talk about their relationships with Bob, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, it's not as if they had just known each other. It's kind of as if they had known each other, like, this entire time. Um, so, like, that's confusing. But I guess, nonetheless, the fact that, like, they know each other and the fact that they both are in a relationship with Bob and, like, know that, um, I feel like it's less of Bob lacking commitment, whereas, like, Bob is just in, like, a polyamorous relationship, you know? And, again, I feel like maybe at the time, because this came out like 1971, I think, maybe at the time, like I said, bisexuality and understanding and accepting it was so new. It's not even like, like they're not even in that progressive state to know, recognize, or understand it as like polyamory. I think the only way that they could really understand it, besides probably being like, oh, like that's a valid sexuality, is seeing it as like the bisexual betrayer trope. And I think now, since we have a much more expansive and more in-depth understanding of like sexuality and gender identity and stuff like that, um, we see that more as a polyamorous relationship, you know? Because again, it's not that he is just bouncing from relationship to relationship. He's in a committed relationship. He's just in a committed relationship with two people. And it's, again, not like he is cheating on them with each other, because they both know that he's in this relationship with someone else. They both understand that, and they they're okay with that at the end of the day. They decide to stay with him at the end of the day. So I feel like more so to that, it to me it seemed more as a polyamorous relationship, and I didn't really take it as really a negative thing in the end because of that. It was just clear communication, and I feel like that is kind of what sets it apart from the trope and it being maybe something else, if that makes sense. So yeah, but I also want to discuss, and this happens a lot, I think, in bisexual films or TV shows. We're going to be talking about it in another one of these films and TV shows. Um, and it is kind of like, well, this is kind of more so clearly seen as bisexuality because you see Bob go through these two relationships. You see him in both relationship, but in less clear films, or in films or TV shows where it centralizes on like one relationship and then like might include another that is with, you know, a different other partner, that could make it seem as bisexual, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm all over the place. But, if it's like if a TV show focuses on a lesbian relationship between two women, and then you see a glimpse of this woman being with this man, but then ultimately she goes back to this other woman, or vice versa or whatever, you could say like, oh, that's kind of like bisexuality, but it's harder to clearly define because so much of the focus is on this one relationship. And in this film, the focus is so clearly on these two relationships, so that there's kind of no need to interpret Bob's bisexuality. You kind of know it, but it's not explicitly addressed. And I feel like that is what happens a lot with bisexual characters or plot lines, is that their sexuality is not explicitly addressed. And that's not necessarily bad in any way. I just think it's interesting. And I want to keep that question going for the films that do not explicitly express it. So for the films that you might have to interpret the character's sexuality, or you might have to interpret or be like, I think that that's bisexual. I think that they're bisexual. I think that's a bisexual plot line. In that aspect, it is more so not needed in this film because it is more clear. But I think in other films and TV shows, especially some of the ones that we're going to be talking about later on, this question is going to come back up, and I want to explore what effect it has on the audience and on bisexual representation as a whole. But that's kind of what I had for Sunday Bloody Sunday. I think it was a pretty good film. Regardless, it was kind of confusing in everybody's relationship with each other, like just how they knew each other and if they knew each other. Um, and there are also some aspects that were odd to be there, but nonetheless, it was a pretty good film. I enjoyed it when I watched. So going on, I want to talk about a TV show that I started. I have not finished, but I think I'm like halfway done. I don't know. I'll have to check back with it. I haven't watched it in a while, but I watched it a couple of weeks ago, and it is called The Bisexual. It is on Hulu, and it is about a woman who just got out of a like long-term committed relationship with another woman. They both, I think, run like some sort of magazine together or whatever, and essentially her partner at the beginning of the show, I think, wants to get married. She wants to move on to the next step because they've been together for like a long time, and she's kind of like, I don't want that. So they kind of take a break, end up breaking up, and then you follow her as she goes through various relationships slash situations of trying to get over her ex, and just deal with all of the aftermath that comes with that. And it is actually, I think it's written, I don't know if it's directed by her, but it stars like the creator of the show who is also bisexual. And surprisingly, she also, I think, wrote and directed The Miseducation of Cameron Post. I can't remember her name. I think it starts with an A. But yes. And in that show, again, I want to talk about what we talked about in our lesbian episode with what Watermelon Woman and Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is kind of like FUBU making it for you by you, because this is a TV show about a bisexual woman, starring a bisexual woman, created by a bisexual woman, and so it probably more so shows the more realistic aspects of being bisexual and what it is like to have those relationships. It is interesting though, again, that it kind of goes into that lack of commitment because she wants to get married, or her partner wants to get married, but she doesn't. Um, but again, I feel like in more nuanced situations and in more current films, it doesn't show up as something where it's like, I just can't decide. It's not something where it goes down to their sexuality where it's like, I just can't decide if I want to be with a woman or if I want to be with a man, not something where it's like, I don't know if I want to commit myself to this type of relationship, more so as it is just her character being like, I don't know if I want to be married right now. I don't know if I want to take that step right now personally. Um, and it seems like it doesn't have much to do with her sexuality as it does just what she wants in her relationship, if that makes sense. What I will say though about it is you see in the you see throughout the TV show where the main character, she gets out of this relationship, this long-term relationship with her partner who's also a woman. So she gets out of this long-term lesbian relationship, and then as she is trying to heal and move on, she starts having this brief relationship with this man. Um, they go to like a bar, I think, and they run into her ex. Her ex is already with somebody. Her ex is in another lesbian relationship. I think her ex is like lesbian. I don't think she's bisexual either. So it's kind of funny because she's already in this relationship with this other woman, but she is so deeply hurt by the main character being in another relationship with a man. It is not less so that she is in another relationship, it is that she's in a relationship with a man, and so I think it kind of shows the ways that like stigma against bisexual people and against bisexual characters um, within the LGBTQ plus community come out, where it's like this, they are in one relationship and then they are kind of expected, I feel like, probably by everybody around them to be to stay in those kinds of relationships, if that makes sense. So it's like she's been in this long-term relationship, this long-term lesbian relationship, and it's like once she gets out of it, it seems as though everybody around her, especially her, other fellow lesbian friends, are kind of like, well, you were just in this long-term relationship, so you should be committed to being in lesbian relationships. So it's like it's it's interesting because it seems as though her ex is more so hurt by her pursuing a straight relationship than she is pursuing a relationship in general. And that's why I feel like the stigma of kind of like bisexual people being the betrayers, they are portraying their sexuality, they are portraying their, especially like their gay, lesbian relationships, their same-sex relationships. Um, they're kind of turning their back on their community in that aspect when they pursue a straight relationship. And I feel like, again, it kind of is often perpetuated by people within their own community, if that makes sense. Not necessarily that like bisexual people are like, oh my gosh, you're in a straight relationship, like you're going against bisexuality. Like, no. But like where it seems as though whatever partner they're with, once they go to a new partner, especially if it's a different kind of relationship, so if they go from a straight relationship to a gay relationship, it seems like their exes feel as though they are obligated to stay in the lines of whatever their past relationship was. I'm having such a hard time explaining it, so hopefully it makes sense. Um, but yeah, in that show, her lesbian ex is more hurt by the fact that she moved on to a straight relationship rather than her moving on to another relationship in general that is still a lesbian relationship. And it seems as though like she feels betrayed because she's betraying her lesbian community by dating this straight man, where it's like, no, I'm just bisexual, you know? I just This is literally just like not what I do, but it's like I'm attracted to both sexes, so it's in my very right to have a relationship with kind of like whoever I want to, even if it is a man or a woman. It has nothing to do with my solidarity to one sexuality. It is just the fact that my sexuality means that I'm attracted to or capable of having a relationship with both sexes, if that makes sense. So I thought that was something interesting because, you see or you hear a lot of bisexual people talk about the stigma that the stigma around bisexuality um, in the world, but also within their own communities, and how they're kind of seen as, again, the bisexual betrayer, somebody who betrays their own kind of communities by pursuing these other relationships with different genders or sexes. um and you see that problem come up in the TV show, which I think is particularly interesting. And it kind of shows you the ways that, again, bisexuality is still like stigmatized, or the way that there are still like stereotypes or tropes around the bisexual person or the bisexual character. And again, since this TV show is created by a bisexual person, I feel like it doesn't portray that moment as inherently bad. I feel like it more so sheds light on that moment and the expectations on bisexual people. Again, outside of their outside of the LGBTQ plus community, but also within that community as well. And I thought that was pretty interesting to note. Um, yeah, I don't have much to say on it because again, I haven't finished the TV show. Um, so I think that there are probably other aspects of the TV show or other aspects, yeah, other aspects of the TV show that highlight different parts of kind of what it means to be bisexual, um, and kind of the trials and tribulations you face again within your own communities, but in the world, I guess, in general. But that's kind of all I had for the TV show so far. I thought it was still also a good TV show. You know, I think that these are all good TV shows and good movies. But again, you see how these different tropes or these different stereotypes kind of come up, or you see how they manifest in real life, or you see how people portrayed it at the times, if that makes sense. So moving on to our third movie, TV show, whatever. It is the movie Alex. I think it's called Strange Love, if I remember correctly. I think it's on Netflix. I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix. I think it might be like a Netflix original. Nickle. But anyways, um, because we gotta talk about our queer youth. We always gotta come back to our queer youth. And in this case, this is a film about a teenage boy. He is in, again, a long-term relationship with a girl. Um, they love each other, whatnot. And I think he goes to like a party and then he meets this one guy and then he starts to feel feelings for him. And in the process, he's like, oh my gosh, like, am I gay? What's going on? What are these feelings? Um, and I think in the end, he comes out as bisexual. So I wanted to talk about it for a variety of reasons. Again, I want to talk about it for queer youth representation. I think that a lot of the films that we talk about that explore what it means to be coming of age or to be a teenager, to be a kid, and coming into your sexuality, I think they all do a really good job of showing um, the exploration of that, but also coming to understand yourself and coming to understand it in general. And they all kind of show their own parts within, I don't want to say the spectrum of like coming out. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes any sense. But it's like Pariah. Pariah came out and she came out to a family that was not inclusive. They were not supportive. Um, and in that regard, they were very much like toxic and harmful for her and her sexuality, exploration, stuff like that. That is on one side of the scale. Then you have like Love Simon. Love Simon, at least we'll say to his family. His friends are another story, but I guess in general, his friends are accepting of his sexuality, but also they were, so whatever. But like, we'll say in his family's regard, he was very much accepted, kind of with full arms. Is that the same? But yeah, and so again, like that's on the other side of the scale, spectrum, whatever, where Pariah was not accepted, he was accepted, and I feel like, if I remember correctly, Alex Strangelove, um, I know that there was like a dispute between him and his girlfriend at the time, and I don't remember if he came out to his parents, but I feel like his kind of fell in the middle where I think she did kind of accept him at the end. But they didn't stay together. I think they broke up, but she still was like, I have a lot of love for you and I hope that you're happy, blah, blah, blah. Um, but there was that initial part where she was just so heartbroken at the fact of finding it out. She might not have been the most supportive. And so, again, these films, they tackle queer youth and what it is like to come into your sexuality, to find yourself out. But also, I feel like they do a good job of showing um, different plot points, I guess, of like coming out scenarios where you see one where, again, thankfully, Pariah wasn't extremely violent. It didn't end in her being kicked out. I think she left on her own. But it also didn't end in any sort of like really serious violence. She wasn't hurt or killed, thank God. But it kind of shows, I guess, the more harmful effects of coming out to a non-inclusive community or family, and vice versa throughout the other films. So I feel like that was interesting. Also with Alex Strangelove, but I think it's different from the other two films that talk about queer youth, again, Pariah and Love, Simon, is those films, their characters seem to already know that they are gay. Their characters seem to already know, and come to terms with themselves. It is just a matter of coming out to their loved ones. And in this film, you literally see him start out as being this happy, straight kid. Happy, straight kid. He's in a relationship with a girl. He loves her very much, blah, blah, blah. And you see that progression where he starts to figure himself out. He starts to find out that, there's this guy and I'm actually really attracted to him. Um, I'm starting to form feelings for him. Oh my gosh, I think I might not be entirely straight. What is this? Am I gay? Do I love my girlfriend? Yes, I do. So what does this mean? Blah, blah, blah. And again, I liked how it shows that progression, and it shows, um, I, I don't know, maybe a more realistic portrayal of what it is like to find yourself while being a teenager and while being in high school. Um, and kind of what it looks like again for a bisexual character. I think again, like with the bisexual, there is also a point where, especially with the girlfriend, especially when he's telling her about him liking another guy, there is kind of the opposite effect of being committed to a sexuality. Because, I mean, she's kind of, I guess, hurt because she's finding out that this guy that she has been in a relationship for so long, this guy that she is in love with, is starting to have feelings for somebody else that is not her in general, but is also, another guy. But I think again, it kind of shows this, um, I don't want to say harassment, but kind of like the pestering of like bisexual people to kind of be committed to a sexuality. And so in the bisexual case, um, she's kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, like coerce. I don't want to say coerce. All of this sounds so like harmful and extreme, but like she's just kind of like pestered into being like, well, maybe you should stay committed to like lesbianism, you veering off with this man, this seems more deviant, like you just seem like you're not committed to a cause. You've been in this relationship with this woman for this long time, so you can't be attracted to men anymore. You need to just stay with bisexual relationships, or you need to stay with lesbian relationships and um, in a lesbian relationship. And it's kind of the opposite with this film because it's like you have been in this straight relationship for so long. This just has to seem like, this just doesn't make sense. These are not real feelings. You just need to stay committed to a straight relationship. You know, if you're not going to be with her, you need to be with another girl, not with this man or not with this guy. Um, And I think, again, it just shows kind of like the opposite effect of the maybe the messages that a lot of bisexual people face when they go from or just coming to terms with their bisexuality, or when they transition from one relationship to another relationship that are, different in that regard. So yeah, that's all I have for that one as well. Um, so I guess like the last two films that I want to talk about, they I'm kind of talking about them together, like jointly, because they are, like I said, at the beginning of this episode, they're less overt about their portrayal of a bisexual character. I think that you can definitely make those connections. It's not like it's like really coded or anything. The parts where they deviate from the focus of the plot, or like they're most focused on relationship, is like the part that might it's like the parts where they deviate from like the focus of the plot, or like the focus of their relationship, is kind of what makes it feel overall bisexual, if that makes sense. So the first one is High Fidelity, which RIP High Fidelity. So sad. I'm so hurt about that. First of all, let's talk about that. First of all, I'm so hurt about it. Um, I really enjoyed the show. I had some thoughts, I had some opinions, and I had some critiques on it, but overall I really enjoyed the TV show. I love Zoe Kravitz. I love Zoe Kravitz so much. And so I was really looking forward to the next season. And it got canceled from Hulu, which, like, I'm not going to say that that's what everybody made it seem. I'm just going to say that I kind of hope that it's going to get picked up again somewhere along the lines. I don't know. You know, it would be a great Netflix TV show. I feel like Hulu and Netflix, their TV shows, um, they have similar vibes, similar audiences. So, I don't know. Regardless, I'm sad that it got canceled. But that's not what we're talking about today. So in High Fidelity. High Fidelity season mostly focused on Rob, the main character, and her trying to get over her most recent ex. I forgot what his name is. I feel like it starts with a D. I don't remember. And he's a man. They were in a straight relationship. But throughout the or throughout the season, she talks about like her five biggest heartbreaks, and she talks about those relationships, and eventually leads to this one. So, but in as she goes through the list of her five heartbreaks, she has one ex that is a woman. And throughout the short time that they show her going through that relationship, it doesn't make it seem like it was kind of just like a hookup. It made it seem like it was an actual relationship. She was actually in love with her. Um, it treats it as a very valid relationship. But again, since it is not the focus of the TV show, and in the way that they went about talking about these relationships, they all kind of seem short lived to some degree, even if um, she says that like it was a long relationship or whatever. And again, the focus is so minimal on all of these relationships that when that happens, especially with it being the only female or the only like lesbian relationship, um, I think you're kind of left being like, so wait, what was that about? You know? And so for a while, I kind of just forgot that happened, forgot that this was kind of like a bisexual character, and it centered around a bisexual character, especially because, again, there's that one part when they talk about their relationship. There's another part where they kind of meet up but she's not focused on really her as much. She's again more so focused on her ex or this new relationship with this one guy. And so it's just kind of like it's not it's just never focused on, I feel like, enough to really concretely confirm that it is explicitly bisexual, if that makes sense. Um yeah. So like I kind of not that I would consider it to be, but I think that it is kind of in the category of like a brief bi encounter. Um it's not one of those kind of like for the male gaze things where it's just the straight girl and she kisses her best friend or she makes out with a girl at a bar or something like that. Where it kind of serves no purpose and doesn't really add validity to the character's bisexuality or bisexuality as a whole. It is just again kind of used for male gaze. It's not one of those cases, but I feel like it is again. It's not like the other films and TV shows we talked about where it is a bigger focus or the main focus of the plot or the TV show or really the character at all. And the other film that kind of touches upon that is the film The Half of It. It's also on Netflix, or it is on Netflix. Um, so I know I really enjoyed that movie. I thought it was great. And it's interesting because it's one of those. It's I feel like, at least to me, it is one of those films that you kind of get wrapped up in one plot line that like you forget, like, oh, this character is bisexual. Because in the film it is about this girl, Ellie Chu, who helps this one guy like write love letters, or helps him try and get in this relationship with this popular girl. I forget what her name is. F something. I forget what her name is. Ah. Anyways, and she's trying to help him get with her, but she also likes her as well. And I guess spoiler, in the end, she finds out that Ellie Chu has been helping him slash writing all the love notes, text messages, whatnot, back and forth, um, on the guy's behalf. But it's actually been her. And right before Ellie goes off to college, they kind of meet, discuss. She's like, "Why'd you do that?" She's like, "Blah blah blah," and then they kiss, and that's kind of really it. But it's one of those things where again you kind of get so wrapped up in the fact that Ellie too likes her and is doing this to be with her. So in the end, when they kind of do end up together, you're happy about that kind of coming full circle. And I feel like you often forget that she was kind of briefly seeing the other guy, and she did also kiss the other guy. Which again, you're like, Ellie's been doing that to get with her. She kind of got what she wanted. It's like you see this underlying plot of her indirectly talking to the girl that they're kind of both going for as Ellie. You see her having this conversation with her, and you see them connecting, even though it's through the guise of the other guy. You kind of see them connecting, and so that's where your heart kind of lies, and that's kind of where the plot line focuses on. So that eventually, when it happens, I think, at least I saw it more so of like, yay, these two girls got together, like, hail lesbians. Um, but you don't necessarily see her in relationship with the guy, if that makes sense. Especially because Ellie Chu is the main character in this film, so you kind of see that beeline to this other girl as kind of the main focus of the relationship or the main focus of the plot line in general. But I think if you step back and you look and you realize, you're like, oh, this is one, a story about a lesbian character, but this also includes two, a bisexual character, because, half the time, or, throughout most of the film, she is talking to slash dating um, guys. She's talking to this guy, but she's also dating a guy. And, essentially when both of those kind of blow up, um, not that this is a reaction to those relationships ending, but kind of when those relationships take a back seat, are no longer important, then you see this lesbian relationship happen and flourish and whatnot. And again, I think a lot of people, they forget about the fact that she was dating a guy and was talking to another guy, which I can kind of understand because she doesn't seem very interested in both, especially her boyfriend. She seems as though she's only with her boyfriend for popularity's sake, but also kind of like just to give her like a pass through life. She doesn't seem like she has really ever cared for him or has really ever loved him or loves him in general, which again, I feel like makes it so much easier to believe less in her bisexuality and more in just this lesbian relationship, if that makes sense. Um, and so yeah, but also since that they only share this kiss and it's kind of like in this fleeting moment, I think a lot of people could. I mean, I don't know. I don't see how one could do this, but I think, maybe a lot of people could see it again as another brief bi encounter where it's like you just had this feelings for this one girl in that one moment. And less of like, you were like a bisexual person or she's a bisexual character in general. Um, but I think that it's also interesting to think about because the more that you look into it and the more that you think about it again, um, you see that I want to say her name is Florence, but I know it's not. Like I keep thinking that in my mind, but I want to say her name is Florence, but I know it's not. Is that her last name? I have no idea. But whatever. The girl that everybody wants, the popular girl, whatever. Um, yeah, the more that I think you sit and think about it, the more that you realize, like, oh, she is a bisexual character. This movie can also also has or shows a bisexual character in the midst of a lot of different sexuality storylines and plot lines. But I guess amongst this mostly gay lesbian um, story or relationship. So yeah, I think High Fidelity and the half of it again, they show, I guess, in comparison with the other three films and TV shows we talked about, less overt um, stories about bisexual characters or bisexual characters. Um, because again, their bisexuality in and of itself is not the main focus of the storyline. And that's kind of where the not explicitly addressing it kind of comes into play, where a lot of people can be like, oh, since it wasn't a main focus of the storyline, I didn't think that they were bisexual at all, or I didn't see it, I didn't catch up on that. But a lot of other people could be like, oh, even though it wasn't explicitly told in their storyline, I caught up on it, and I like how this less overt way of talking about or centering a story on a bisexual character or bisexuality is done or brought up, if that makes sense, you know? So it's like I think it's not necessarily bad. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way that High Fidelity and the half of it um, talked about or showcased by characters or bisexuality. I think it's just another way where they show characters where it's not a central plot line of the story or of the film, but it still includes it nonetheless. It doesn't have to be something where they say like that is a bisexual person in the film or in the story, for you to know it, or not that their bisexuality is not important, but again, it is not the only personality trait of that character in general, if that makes sense. Um, so that's all I have for this episode. This is, I guess, one of the shorter episodes. Not because of anything, I guess. It's just I feel like maybe I was more concise with my thoughts. But for other films that talk about or address bisexuality that I would maybe recommend, the first one is Princess Sid. I watched that movie. I wanted to talk about it, but I knew I needed to rewatch it, and I just didn't have the time to rewatch it. Um, I guess in time for this episode at least, but I know that that kind of talks about bisexuality, and it's more so. I don't remember. It's more so in the case maybe Alex Strangelove, I think, where the girl is in a relationship with a guy and she meets another girl and starts to have feelings for her. I don't really remember. But yeah, that is a film that has a bisexual character. I think she is a bi lead. And it's also on Netflix. And another one I started, another one that I started yesterday, I didn't get to finish either. It's called Theorem or Theorema. I don't know. I think it's a French film from either the 1960s, like late 1960s, I think, or like early 1970s. And that film is interesting. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird for being honest. It is about a man, a strange man that comes into like this family's house. I forget exactly what his relationship to them is, but he is welcome to this family's home. And essentially, it is about the fact that he like seduces everybody in the family. And then he leaves, and then they're all in distress because of it. Very interesting. Watching it is a more interesting experience. But yeah, that is a bi film. That is on the Criterion channel. So if you want to watch that, you have the Criterion channel. You can. Um, Again, you could watch Basic Instinct. I know that's a popular film. It's a big popular film. To I guess again see maybe the more harmful effects of bisexual representation. Um, so yeah, and that's kind of all I have for this episode. So I guess it's time for my closing remarks. So what do I say is my closing remarks? One, if you if you're just watching this one episode and you have not seen the rest of the episodes in this series, I highly recommend you watch the other ones. They all kind of relate back to each other. Like I said, especially in this episode, I reference, that's the word. I reference a lot of themes or TV shows and movies that we talked about in our earlier episodes, like with our lesbian or gay episodes. But also, if you want to know more about why I'm doing this Pride series in general, but to also understand more about what the series entails, you should definitely watch our introductory episode as well and all of our other episodes for this podcast while you're at it. Um, if you are watching this on YouTube, I highly recommend you subscribe so that you can stay up to date on the episodes to come, so you can watch the episodes to come. Um, but also maybe any like behind the scenes or extra content that I might put up in the future. If you're listening to this podcast, I don't know what people do to save podcasts. I think you subscribe if like you're on Apple Podcasts. I don't know. But like subscribe to this podcast in podcast form, whatever that entails, so that you can also be refreshed on new episodes. If you want to be in the know, also receive extra content relating to this podcast in general, I have an Instagram for the podcast. It is at sickflick.pod. Um, so yeah, I put out posts whenever there's a new episode. Also, I put out posts, asking for opinions, relaying facts. Like right now for the Pride series, we are putting out posts where we discuss some of the facts that we talked about in the latest episodes. Just get some bite-sized tidbits on some of the facts that we discuss in these episodes. But yeah, also any extra content, stuff like that. Besides that, I think that's all I have to say. So I'm happy that we got this little episode in. Sorry if it is shorter than expected or shorter than you would want it to be. I just think that maybe I was more concise with my thoughts this episode. But nonetheless, I'm excited to be back and to have this episode for this to be our 10th episode. And I'm excited to finish out this series so far. We only have 2 more episodes after this, which is crazy. But yes, I look forward to that. Look forward to talking to you guys next week. So with that being said, peace out, Girl Scout.